Hi everyone, I'm so happy to have you back today. Thank you so much for coming along. My name is Jean Campbell and I started I'm Fine to share personal stories, practical solutions, and mind body techniques to help listeners move beyond pain. I'm so excited to introduce you to my guest, Professor Giles Yeo, today from Cambridge University, who is a geneticist and has 20 years' experience in obesity and food intake. Today, we're going to be talking about Ozempic, something that we've all heard a great deal about, but maybe don't know all that there is to know. So I wanted to get the facts around this drug that everyone's talking about. We're not going to be discussing Ozempic from a point of opinion or ideology or anything like that. We're just going to be discussing Ozempic from the perspective of health in its full 360 form. I'm really excited for you to hear Professor Giles Yeo's perspective. I certainly learnt a lot. Welcome.
Thanks for having me, Jean.
Oh no, honestly, I'm so thankful to you for taking the time today. I've been really, really excited to talk to you because, as we discussed previously, I don't think that I've heard of a drug this much possibly in my lifetime. And I think our different backgrounds allow us to have a very well-rounded discussion about Ozempic. So do you want to start off by kind of maybe explaining to the audience or telling the audience kind of why you got into obesity as your research and why Ozempic is of interest to you in light of health and well-being?
So, I got into obesity by chance, actually, as these things do. I had just finished my PhD. So I sound weird. I'm from California. I sound weird because my wife's English.
You
And
don't
towards the end
sound
of my
weird.
PhD, I elected not weird, okay, but I elected to sort of stay in the UK. So I needed a job. I did my PhD in molecular genetics, so I'm a geneticist, and so I went knocking on doors, and it just so happened that the second door I knocked on was Stephen O'Reilly, as you read out, and he had just at the time discovered the first couple of genes that, when mutated, cause severe obesity in very young kids. Okay, and so he was recruiting young kids with severe obesity and needed a geneticist. I knocked on the door. I was a geneticist. He needed a geneticist, so I was hired. And so I started just because that was someone who offered me a job. So I started my career looking, and this is over nearly 30 years ago now. So I started my career looking at the genetics of severe early onset obesity, childhood obesity, but then has since segued into body weight in general, right? Small, medium, or large. Now, my interest in Ozempic, semaglutide is the chemical name for those of you who care,
Thank
came
you.
because what my position here in Cambridge is the professor of molecular neuroendocrinology, which is a freaking mouthful. Molecular, we know, okay. Neuro, we know. Endocrinology is the study of hormones. So actually, what I study is how hormones south of the neck communicate with the brain. And as it turns out, Ozempic, semaglutide, is a modified version of one of these hormones south of the neck and how it communicates with the brain. So it's a natural. So I study the natural hormones and how they signal to the brain. But the moment these drugs came out, then it was a natural extension to begin to study them, to
Hmm.
begin to realize, to figure out how and where they work within the brain. So that's it. So why obesity, and also why I actually ended up looking at Ozempic.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for that introduction. So, what would be really helpful is obviously we're going to really get into the discussion, but in order to kind of understand the science behind the myth, I'd really love to understand a little bit about the natural hormones south of the neck that influence body weight and obesity, and then how that then interplays with the drug, or how the drug interplays with those hormones.
So I studied the genetics of body weight, as we've mentioned, and we now understand that the genetics of body weight is by definition the genetics of how our brain influences our feeding behavior. Okay, for that. Um, and so your brain broadly needs internal information rather than external information. Your brain, broadly speaking, needs to know two pieces of information in order to influence your feeding behavior. Okay, it needs to know how much fat you have. Okay, because that is how long you would last without any food. So long-term energy, and it needs to know, crucially, what you're currently eating and what you have just eaten. And these are your short-term energy signals, and they're going to come from your gut, your intestines and your stomach. And so all of these are hormonal. Okay, so your gut secretes hormones, your fat secretes hormones, and they circulate in the blood and then signal to the brain. So your brain then senses these long and short-term signals and then influences your next interaction with a menu, with a refrigerator, or with a restaurant. So where the gut hormones sit is where it intersects with these drugs, because the fat hormones influence hunger and starvation. Okay, so in other words, that side of the equation, the gut hormones influence what you're eating, fullness, and then, oh my god, I feel so full, I feel like puking. Okay, so you got to think about it like that. And so where the natural hormones, so when we eat, and every mouthful of food we eat that goes through our esophagus into our stomach and out the other side, hormones are released. And
Hmm.
two of these hormones are GLP-1, which is what Ozempic is based on, and GIP. Okay, GLP-1 and GIP is what Monjaro is based off. Okay, so those are
Hmm.
now, so all of these drugs mimic these two hormones, GLP-1 and or GIP. Okay, for that. And so these are natural hormones that go up, and they do two things. The natural hormones do two things. They signal to the pancreas to enhance the secretion of insulin for every gram of sugar you eat. Okay, so
Hmm.
in other words, insulin levels are just more sensitive to actually rising. So that's why they're a diabetes drug. But crucially, they then signal to the brain, the back part of the brain, where they make you feel fuller. And when you feel fuller, you eat less. When you eat less, you actually lose weight. Okay, so the natural role of the hormones is to do that, to enhance insulin secretion and let you know that, oh, I've now eaten so much food, I'm now feel fuller. What the drugs do is prolong the effect of these hormones. In other words, they don't. These hormones are chopped up after 2 minutes, typically. Okay, when they
Hmm.
when they get released from the gut, they go. The enzymes actually chop them up. The what the pharma companies have done is put decorations on these hormones, what you're injecting in, to keep it in the blood for longer. And so now they're once weekly injections, as we know.
Hmm.
And so as a result, they're used as drugs for both type 2 diabetes and for obesity, because they now stick around the blood for longer, enhancing insulin secretion for longer, type 2 diabetes, making you feel fuller quicker.
Hmm.
Hence, they make you eat less and then you lose weight. So, broadly speaking, that's how these drugs work.
Thank you so much for that breakdown. If we could just get into the mechanics of how Ozempic actually works in a little bit more detail, and what Ozempic actually is. Where does it come from? And it would then be really great to obviously talk about what health is and who is appropriate to be taking the drug.
So, Ozempic, as I said, is a modified version of a natural hormone. So the thing about it is, this is a little bit of an interesting story, I guess. So the natural hormone goes up, and so people were trying initially, rather than having some fancy drug, they were trying initially to just take the natural hormone, like you do with insulin. Okay, so when you inject insulin, insulin is the natural hormone. When you're injecting GLP-1, it is the natural hormone, but the problem is that it gets chopped up very, very quickly.
Hmm.
So it turns out that where the inspiration for how to keep it in the blood for longer actually came from a creature called the Gila monster. Okay, and the Gila
Right.
monster is just a reptile, and it has a venom. Okay, and in the venom is GLP-1, but because of how Gila monsters eat, they only eat 4 times a year, like a python, right? And they eat a big whatever mouse, and then they kind of sit there for like 3 months waiting for the to digest. Now, because gut hormones have to do this, if it just does this, then it won't be able to digest the food properly with the insulin. So it keeps, because it only eats 4 times a year, it keeps the GLP-1 in the blood for far, 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 far longer. Okay.
Hmm.
And so scientists then realize this and go, ooh, Okay, and so they looked and studied this Gila monster version of it, and that is when the inspiration for how to modify the hormone comes from. And so that is in effect this modified version. It came from inspiration from the Gila monster, and now you inject it. It sticks around the blood for certainly around a week, which is what they're doing. Then it sticks around the blood and it hits the rear of the brain and the center of the brain. And when it hits the brain, it tells you, I'm full. Or at least you don't need as much food to get filled up. Okay. So almost consider it that what you're doing, because ultimately with Ozempic, you're only changing one hormone level, one. Okay. And consider it like a thermostat. So typically, if you say that, normally I need to eat this much food to get full up, because naturally GLP-1 levels go up, the natural hormone goes up. So by injecting yourself, you now raise or lower the hurdle for which when you actually get full. And so you get full quicker. So typically what you then eat, if you normally eat two chicken wings, now you only need one chicken wing, and then suddenly it says, oh, I'm actually full. So that's how it works. It makes you feel fuller, so you eat less, then you lose weight.
Thank you for that breakdown. And I'm fascinated by the Gila monster. Can we just side note for my pure entertainment, where did we come across the Gila monster? Where does it live?
Oh my God, that's an interesting question. I think you get the Gila monster. It's out in, certainly you can find it in South America. I do think you find it I think it's a North American creature. Someone fact check me. But it's a desert-based
We'll
reptile.
confirm that in the show
Please do.
notes. Thank you so much. I think later on in the episode, I want to talk about its clinical efficiency and then get into the medical versus cosmetic use. But later on, I'd really love to talk about the psychological reasons behind how we eat. I think that's quite an interesting thing to talk about, and how that's affected, when you're basically masking the symptom. But before we do that, I have so many questions. But before we do that, can we just talk about its clinical efficiency, and how well it actually works? You mentioned to me that it's highly efficient. So the 300-pound person looking to lose 100 pounds will see a very effective result, but so will the 78-pound 17-year-old.
So in the clinical trials, clearly they didn't try them on 17-year-old girls, okay? Little kids, very skinny girls. But in terms of, if we've just focused on Ozempic for now, because I think it's better just to talk about one thing. There are far more effective drugs I want to point out, but Ozempic was the first one. It kind of busted through the door. Okay, it's only about probably now about 5 years. So it came, I think, at the beginning of COVID was when it really made its big splash. Now the clinical trials, which were done over 2 years, and these were once weekly injections, the average weight loss was 15% of body weight. So if we go back to the 300-pound man looking to lose 100 pounds, in effect, okay, the Ozempic would on average probably get that 300-pound man to lose about 50 pounds. Okay, so it
Hmm.
won't get the person to lose the full 100 pounds
I
on
have
average.
one quick question.
Mm,
When you say it generally allows you to lose 15% of your body weight, does that keep going, or is that kind of based on what your original size was?
so it does based on what your original size is from a physics perspective, right? Because obviously you can't disappear and you have bones
Yeah.
and what have you, and your body's internal system will at some point going, what the hell's happening here? So the curve looks like this, okay? Where the weight loss is most rapid, probably in the first, I would say the first 6 to 8 months, and this is the real steep loss. You probably lose something like 10% of your weight in that first 9 months. Okay, 6 to 9 months, depending on who you are, and then the curve goes like this. So it takes the full 2 years to sort of get the 15% off on average. So some people lose 30%, some people lose 5%. Okay, but on
Hmm.
average that 15%, but it does plateau out because at some point you reach a new level, right? Because what you're doing with the hormones is if you put up that hormone to this amount, which is what you're doing, then at some point you'll reach equilibrium. You'll reach, actually, this is the amount of food that I'm going to be eating to feel full enough. And at some point, you reach that equilibrium, and then you now maintain that weight because you don't need to lose any more weight. You've now reached a new thermostat. You've now gone from 37 degrees Celsius down to 30 degrees Celsius, and your temperature will then stay at 30 degrees Celsius, so
Mhm.
to speak, with the analogy with how full you actually feel. So, you don't disappear. Now, when you then ask the question about what happens when you start at a lower body weight, you're right. Clearly, you're not going to, if you don't have that much fat to lose to begin with, you're not going to lose 15% of your body weight, but you have far less of a buffer zone if you're really skinny. That these drugs are not designed for skinny people. Okay, they're just not designed for them. But it will still work in a skinny person. That's the problem. Now, it may only cause you to lose 5 or 10% of your body weight, but you may not have 5 to 10% to lose to begin
Mhm.
with before all kinds of weird things happen, right? So you need to maintain a certain amount of fat, a certain amount of muscle mass, and everything that is there. So all these numbers come from people who are appropriately taking the drug. They
Mhm.
need the drug to lose the weight, and those are the numbers. The moment you start misusing it for not for illness but for cosmetic reasons, the drug companies are not going to test them on a
No.
17-year-old, 75-pound
And
girl.
what determines appropriate use and illness versus inappropriate use and
So that's the
cosmetic use?
$64 million question. So, in fact, we can probably back off and say, well, assuming that we're talking about the obesity side of things, okay, let's leave the type 2 diabetes side of things aside, because actually most people, Ozempic, as I said, as you said, designed for type 2 diabetes, but the weight loss is almost a side effect. Okay,
Mhm.
so for there, the version of the drug that is used for weight loss is actually called Wegovy, which is exactly the same chemical, slightly different dosing regime, but most people use the Ozempic version because it's easier to get, I think. Okay, so for that, so in terms of when we actually think, what does obesity mean? And it is not just BMI, body mass index of 30 and above, which is, it used to be the clinical explanation for what it is, because that is just a number on a scale. So that's just your weight. I think we within the field are now beginning to understand that obesity is more nuanced. It is carrying too much fat that it begins to influence your health. All of us have a safe amount of fat that we can store because we need fat. It's our long-term energy stores. Okay. We need it for health. We need it for anything. What happens is if you carry too much fat. Now, when you carry too much fat, the fat then sort of spills out of fat where it's supposed to be stored. The moment it goes to your muscles, to your liver, to your kidneys, they then begin to sort of interfere with the normal function of your other organs. That is illness. Now, this illness could display itself as type 2 diabetes, heart disease, high blood pressure. That is what I mean by illness. These are the individuals who should appropriately receive the drugs. Now, if you are a little bit heavier, look, I'm not a skinny person, right? But no one's going to give me Ozempic. But if I tried to get it, I probably could get it, right? No one's going to give me Ozempic because I'm not ill. I'm not ill. Okay, I can go run, I can do the thing. I wish I could lose 10 pounds, but I'm not ill. I shouldn't get the drug. You definitely shouldn't get the drug if you are skinny. So that's what I mean by
Why?
appropriate. Why
Uh,
shouldn't you get the drug if you're skinny? Hmm, that's a very philosophical question. I think there is a safety issue. I think there's a safety issue because the drug works whatever your starting weight. Okay. So I think there's probably, in fact, let's play a game. Let's just play a game. Imagine we get to the point, and I'm not saying this is the case, but let's imagine we get to the point in the future where we know the drug is safe long term as long as it's appropriately given. Okay, let's
mhm.
let's imagine that. Let's imagine that. Would it suddenly be wrong to use it if I was me and I need to lose 10 pounds? Okay. And would it be so wrong for me to say, "Do you know what? I need to lose 10 pounds. I'm going to use the drug and I know it's safe and I'm going to use it for 3 months and I know the 10 pounds will melt away and disappear." If it's safe, would that be wrong? Probably not, actually, because we accept when we go to Boots or wherever to buy ibuprofen, or you know, um, Panadol, that
Mhm.
If I had a whole tub of Brufen or Panadol, that'd be pretty bad for me. I'd have to go to the hospital. Okay. But yet, society now accepts that I go to Boots, I buy it, and I know I'm only supposed to take 6 tablets or 8 tablets a day, depending on my headache
It's
and stuff.
intentional and purpose driven.
It's attentional, it's purpose driven. Society has agreed that for this particular drug, we can self medicate as and when because most of us look at the back, we sort of kind of follow the rules. They're not addictive. Okay, you can't do this with an amphetamine but ibuprofen is not addictive. Okay,
Hmm.
and it's not morphine, and so you can do that. Now, if we get to the point that these drugs are that safe, would it be wrong to use it? I don't think so. Now, we're nowhere near that. The
Hmm.
problem is the difference between ibuprofen and this drug is the fact that it works for everybody. You're not going to take ibuprofen if you've got no headache. What the hell are you taking it,
Yeah.
right?
And you
Whereas,
don't have aesthetic side effects
no, you're absolutely right.
when you take an ibuprofen,
You're
do
just
you?
removing the headache or a fever or something like that. You don't suddenly look you 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 don't suddenly look better for that. And you're absolutely right.
It's
These
actually
drugs.
very interesting. Sorry to
No, no,
butt
please.
in. It's very interesting what you said. We don't suddenly look better because I think it's
Better's a
interest.
bad word.
No, I know, but I'm just say, because I think that's not an opinion. That's something that um I think our culture and society, it kind of begs a bigger question because it's like, why is it that thinness is so celebrated? Why is it that, if you're the 17-year-old who's already slim, who feels like they should go on it, or you're someone who's healthy and you don't have any health issues relating to your weight, why is it that you should go on it? Or why is it that you shouldn't go on it? I guess it's a question for me. The question is sustainability, and also, what is it in the first place that makes you feel like you couldn't do that with a sense of freedom in your own empowerment and autonomy over your body? And how sustainable is it to rely on a drug that when you stop taking, its effects will stop working?
It's an interesting question. I think it's a complex question, and there are two bits in it. First of all,
Sorry.
what? No, 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 no. It's a good. These are good questions to ask. So first of all, weight. Okay, and at the moment we do equate weight with beauty. We do. Okay, as opposed to weight with health, which is what we should be doing because of this weird kind of world we're living in currently. Historically, what we deem to find attractive, whatever attractive means, tended to be, as is most things in life, wrapped up in the ability to reproduce. This is what good to our mind. What
In a
size are
most
your boobs?
primal
Exactly.
sense.
What size are your hips? Is the guy gonna be passing on good genes and good what have you? So therein lies there. But this is no longer the reason because there is no evolutionary reason. Okay, why someone who is super skinny, okay, with no hips, for example, is, aside from the fact that we now consider it quote unquote good looking, why that would be reproductively um advantageous. Okay, now I don't want to talk like we're all animals, but we are mammals after all. So I think we've got to the stage where where fashion, for lack of a better term, of the body weight has actually come into play. And there has always been periods of time where the curvier look was better, and then suddenly now the skinny look is better, and so there are always this involved. So under this is an undercurrent. Now you paste this undercurrent of fashion with body weight, and now give people the ability to change it relatively rapidly. And this is that intersection which we have not met in society yet. So I think we need to really think about it. If we ignore the ill people that I think should get the drug, and I don't think that's controversial, okay, this is the intersection we're talking about. Okay, so at the moment it's not safe. So at the moment, I don't think we should even be talking about it because we don't know enough about the drug for us to use it cosmetically. I guess the debate
Driven by aesthetic desires.
driven by aesthetic desire, right? So I guess the debate, societal debates, because after all, most of these conversations have to be acceptable, or at least it's sort of it's an acceptable within the society you're in. It's going to change from society to society and from culture to culture, but there needs to be an acceptance about the acceptable use of a drug like this as long as it's safe. And I guess
Hmm.
that is where we are at. And we're not, first of all, two things. We are nowhere near the stage in which it's safe enough to meet into this category. At the moment, it's designed to be up in the unhealthy bit rather than in the gamish of this grayness of fashion and cosmetics.
Mm. And you also said when we spoke previously, you are double as likely to have issues with obesity and your health around weight in relation to poverty. Yet it's those who are more public facing use of the drug is more discussed in light of aesthetics and beauty and body image.
So it's. I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, you opened this program, this interview, by saying that, you know, that you can't think of another drug, or at least difficult to think of another drug that we all know the name of. And you're absolutely right, right? So aside from ibuprofen, which is a brand name or something like where you can think Advil, sorry, ibuprofen is the name of the drug. In some, but actually we don't know the names of drugs. So that's the first thing. So that's interesting in of itself. The second thing is that 95 now, leaving aside the United States, which has its own type of Wild West free market system, we live in a country, the UK has a national healthcare system, has an NHS, and we typically get our drugs from the NHS. But yet, 95% of the people on these new weight loss drugs are getting them privately in a country with an NHS. I cannot think of another example in which that is the case. So, in order to pay the 150 to 200 quid a week, sorry, a month, to do it, it's not super expensive, but you have to be privileged. You have to be pretty well off in order to do it. And as you say, the poorer you are, the more likely you are to end up with obesity and these metabolic diseases. So at the moment, it's privileged people, and a lot of them are worried well, who are able to get the drug. And actually, the drugs are not getting anyway into the people that really need it. And so what we have now is cultural aesthetic in terms of what is considered good looking, meeting socioeconomic status. And I think this is a tale as old as time, right? Where the pretty people are always the privileged people, mostly, right? And it's not actually getting to the people who need it the most.
Absolutely. Diabetes is one of the biggest strains on the NHS. So there is potentially huge benefits. But then at the same time, what are the kind of broader root causes that our system might be ignoring by just
I
dealing with the weight side of things? What about the food? What about the farming? What about the socioeconomic difference there?
so I think we need to now just use the right tool for the job. So this is a drug. So two things. First of all, as all drugs, it will only work when you're taking it. Okay. So therefore there needs to be some kind of long-term solution to using or how you use it or what the dosing strategy is. Okay. That's one issue that we need to think about. The second bigger issue, however, is as you say, it is a drug. So it treats the symptom, which in this particular situation is either type 2 diabetes and or obesity, but it does not tackle the root cause of the problem. And in this particular scenario, the root cause of the problem is the environment. And this could include the built environment, how easy it is to walk to school or what have you. It can include the food environment. And that is the food. This includes advertisement. This includes what's going on, and socioeconomic environment, which is poverty. Okay. Now the
And
drug is
health
not going to
actually is a privilege.
health. Sadly, it shouldn't be
It
a
shouldn't
privilege,
be, but it is.
but
I
it
guess
is a
that's what
privilege.
we're talking about here.
It shouldn't be a privilege. Now, it's not gonna. So what I don't want, and why I'm speaking to you, and why I speak to many many people about this topic, is because the government, in particular policymakers, cannot use the effectiveness of these drugs as an excuse not to make the tough policy decisions to improve the environment we live in, our food environment, to try and tackle poverty, and things like that. Because you need the drug to sort of remove obesity from the scene for large numbers of people, but in order to keep it away
But then where
permanently.
you arrive to be somewhere that's sustainable.
Exactly, but that means fixing the environment to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
And so you need the policy decisions, which are never politically expedient. So they're tough. Okay. Public health is an interesting thing. There's always a tension in public health between the liberties you're willing to lose as a society
Mm-hmm.
for public health. We can't do anything we want. We drive on a specific side of the road. We stop when the red light goes red. We can't do
Mm-hmm.
whatever the hell we want. In
Mm-hmm.
return for that loss of liberty, we are safer.
Mm-hmm.
We have not reached that equilibrium yet in our food environment, in our aesthetic environment, whatever environment, to sort of accept that, look, I accept a certain loss of liberties for population wide to actually be healthy. And we need to reach that equilibrium, which is going to be society and cultural specific.
Yeah, and a lot of it comes from awareness because, of course, we're the people who vote. So what do you
Education.
think?
So exactly. So education needs to be part of the discussion. Yes.
Yeah, which is one of the reasons that we're having this conversation. So if you were to identify just off the cuff the kind of top 3 or top issues that that exist that are causing these issues with diabetes and obesity and weight that ought to be changed, pushing Ozempic out the picture just for one moment.
So I can just give you one. And I
Okay,
think
go on.
one or two things. But let's take the top one first, undoubtedly, because the top one is the easiest, quote unquote. You tell me how easy you think it is. At the moment, this is the problem. I'm enunciating the problem. At the moment, unhealthy food is cheaper than healthy food broadly
Mm-hmm.
across society. All right. And so, therefore, with the socioeconomic gradient, where if you're privileged, like you, like me, like most of your listeners here, not rich, just privileged, where we don't have to worry about our food, then we can choose to have healthy food if we wish. Okay. The problem is because unhealthy food is cheaper, then the poorer you are, the more likely you are to eat it because it's going to be cheaper and you need to feed your kids. All right. So what I would do if I was prime minister for the day and could suddenly a king for the day and could suddenly make a choice, we need to make the healthy food, the healthy choice, the cheaper, just as tasty, okay, and easier choice to make. So it's not a choice at all. It should be the default. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And
A
if that
standard,
exactly the
essentially.
standard, which means that a minimum standard, if you're Mrs. Smith, now let's think about it from an equity perspective. If you're Mrs. Smith with 2 minimum wage jobs trying to feed your kids, and you got a tenner, okay, in order to feed your kids for the day, you should be able to walk into a supermarket. You have reduced choices because you only have a tenner, but what you buy should by default be healthy. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
now if you're like us and we can choose to eat at whatever we want, but then that's our business, and maybe we need to think about things. But that's the first thing I would do. Because if we can make the healthy choice default, and this might mean shifting things around, then that is the way we tackle this from an equitable perspective. Because then, obviously, the second thing is to solve poverty.
Yeah,
But that is a far more complex.
we'll have to
And
do
how do you
another
do that?
episode.
That's another episode. That's another episode. But that's what I would do.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for breaking that down. I guess something that's coming to mind as we're talking is selling things.
Hmm.
And part of selling things is meeting your needs and your desires and your wants. And I think it's really interesting in light of this conversation to talk about influence and also responsibility, because I do think that there can't be no knock-on effect in light of mental health. You know, what we consume and how we see ourselves and our body weight, our image, our worth within society is quite an interesting thing to talk about in this conversation as to why it is that we so desperately are worshipping something which now there is a drug to kind of meet that need.
You're right about selling things. So selling things is an interesting because
I'm in the business of it, of course.
you're in the business of
I'm
selling
owning
things,
that.
and advertisement is, with all the deepest respect to the lovely you, is pretty people selling pretty things. Okay, so ultimately that is what advertisement is. This is what thingy. It is more it is easier, it is more attractive for someone to buy something from someone that looks nice than from someone that looks less nice. And so if you're nice, then you have that whole halo and that whole aesthetic of whatever it is you're selling. Now, are we gonna get a company, whatever the company is selling, whatever, this includes food, this includes makeup, this includes clothes, okay, are we going to get a company to change their mind to do that? No, because companies that are making these items, their job is to make money for their shareholders. Now, you may think that's a very, um, cynical way of looking. I'm not being cynical. I think I'm being a pragmatic. That is their reason. So to push social responsibility onto a company voluntarily, I think is never going to work. I think
Hmm.
it's just never going to work. What you've got to do, the only way to fix this is to sort of delineate some rules. I've spoken to food companies. I don't know the fashion company for fashion industry, but I do know the food industry. And I've spoken to people within the food industry, and what they tell me is that, look, in spite of what people think of them, they do make our food. They want a set of rules that are relatively stable, but everybody has to follow the rules. Okay, here's the size of the pitch. Now, everyone will take it as close to the edge as possible, but it doesn't matter, right? Just give us the set of rules and we will operate within the set of rules. Because if the answer is if you don't follow these rules, you can't sell the product in this country, the vast majority of companies will follow the rules and then sell what's within this country. So I think that's what we've got to do. I want to remove the voluntary element, social responsibility, because that is, some people, some CEOs will have a social responsibility. Many won't because they have other priorities.
Well, they're
And
doing their
so,
job.
exactly. So what you want to do is make it not a choice. Like I'm arguing for making healthy the default. What you got to make sure is you sort of legislate it so that you don't have to rely on social responsibility, so that the product, advertisement, and everything else that's put forward is in of itself acceptable, healthy. That is not
Hmm.
killing people, or at least helping people more than it is killing them.
Hmm. I guess it kind of begs the question of representation and beauty standards, and can health in its raw form, not thinking about what health looks like, but what health feels like and shows up on scans and in science. Can health be a trend? And can it be something that, I would say that, I mean, this is maybe a little bit outspoken of me, but I do think that wellness is a growing status symbol. But what is actual health? And is there a potential for Ozempic to contribute to body dysmorphia, disordered eating, and the reinforcement of harmful beauty standards?
I think when used inappropriately, entirely so. In the past 10 years, we've heard of, we've heard of eating disorders have been around since year naught.
Hmm.
Okay, and body dysmorphia has been around since year naught. They've
And
had
also, can we just address the fact that an eating disorder may have a physical, I mean, it does have a physical presentation in some cases, but not all cases. But eating disorders are, by definition, a mental health illness, which
correct.
then brings it back to the full circle question is we're trying to get rid of illness.
We're trying to get rid of illness. I think it's a false dichotomy to split mental illness and physical illness, because I think
Absolutely.
mental illness is a response to hormonal imbalance and things like that. But I understand what you're saying.
Hmm.
And so I do think we need to fix both sides of things. So you have to take care of the people who need it appropriately, who are larger, who are carrying too much fat, But how do you then protect and shield those people who sit within this scenario, who are then susceptible to the negative mental effects of actually being exposed to people saying that, oh look, I'm now on the drug, I've lost the weight, what have you. Oh, and then them never actually getting hold of the drug to begin with. I think that's a complex question. I don't know if we can fix that question because that's a broader societal thing. But it doesn't mean that the people who need to get it shouldn't get it. I think we just need to the broader problem is that we need to speak about health more than we speak about aesthetic. And at the moment, we are all obsessed with aesthetic. Okay, is that something that is changeable societally in the time that I'm alive? I don't know, mate. I
No.
really, really don't know. Just so cynical, but I don't know.
Yeah, and I don't think it is necessarily, I mean, I'm not the expert, of course, you are, but just
From food
I
intake, I'm not the expert on aesthetic.
I don't think that it's I don't think this is about any kind of shaming or it has, you have to be this way or that way, but I do feel that it's fair to ask the question when we look at health, is it okay and is it safe to look at one aspect of health in any situation? Or is it important when it comes to thinking about Ozempic to look at the full 360 of health? What about bone density? What about longevity? What about muscle mass? After you start to age, after your body starts to age and stop producing muscle in the same way, what are the implications there? What are the implications for youth vulnerability and mental health surrounding body image, where eating disorders are one of the most deadly addictions?
The answer is, and this is a big reason why, certainly for now, maybe forever, that these drugs should be only prescribed. And they should be prescribed not just in isolation, just with the drug by itself. It should be prescribed with full wraparound care. Now, the wraparound care will depend on who you are. It definitely needs to come with a dietary intervention because you need to continue eating healthily, right? The problem is these drugs will make you feel fuller and it'll make you, if you are currently eating just chips and Oreos, all it will do is make you eat less chips and Oreos. And that
Yeah.
is, you lose weight, but that's not means you're healthy. So you need dietary intervention. Any rapid weight loss will result in loss of fat, which is what we're aiming for, but
Mm-hmm.
also muscle, which is not what we're aiming for. The
Mm-hmm.
only way to mitigate against that is to make sure you exercise while you're doing it. So there needs to be an exercise intervention. And ultimately, okay, there needs to be some form, particularly some people. I've read some pieces where women in particular, I read there was a piece in the BBC saying that, oh, they've lost their a lot of weight, okay, but suddenly the their mental health is weird because then now people that would never have spoken to them before because they used to be larger ladies, um, suddenly people are coming to speak to them, and so they're thinking, well, what was I before? I'm still me. I'm just less of me. Why are you speaking to me now? How their husbands respond to them, partners respond to them, because suddenly they used to be this size, this thing, the relationship was like this. Suddenly you're thinner. Oh my God, are you more attractive?
Mm-hmm.
Do you not like me anymore? And all of this is part of the mental health bit that also needs to be dealt with.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that obviously we've talked about the hormonal causes of weight gain and obesity? Can we talk a little bit about the potential psychological causes?
Of
Um,
obesity.
yeah.
So now it depends why you end up with obesity to begin with, because there are many. Obesity is perceived as a simple problem because you sort of see in the street and says, oh, that person has obesity. Okay, so it's a weight issue. And from a physics perspective, you're right in terms of just looking at it. The causes of it are completely complex. Now, they could be purely biological, for lack of a better term. All right. So, in other words, some people feel more hungry all the time or less full because of their hormones. And so, that in a way is what the drug is designed to actually try and fix. But then, let me give you an example. Why do some people eat when they become stressed or unhappy,
Mm-hmm.
and some people lose their appetite? when they become stressed or unhappy. My wife, the moment she gets stressed, she goes, I'm not interested in food.
Mm.
I've lost my appetite. Me, you can still get me, completely opposite, right? The moment I get stressed, work stress, whatever stress, I suddenly find myself in a bowl of noodles, okay, where I eat because I'm stressed. Why do some people comfort eat, whereas other people feel the need to go bungee jump or drink or take drugs or go
Mm.
run a marathon? So people respond to stress in different ways.
And we have
Food,
different coping
exactly,
strategies.
coping mechanisms. So I think in that particular scenario, how why someone ends up with obesity needs to be front and center, which will then influence what kind of wraparound care that we actually deploy.
Mm. Is it possible to have a golden pill?
No. And the reason why, so I'm going to answer the question in another way. If we know a lot about someone, the full 360, yeah? So physical, mental, socioeconomic, is there a solution that you can actually solve for that one person? Probably, probably. But because everybody has their own beef, everybody has their own internal, there is not going to be one solution that fits all. It's impossible from societal or biological reason. Everybody is going to have their own thing, and so you need to tackle their each person's own thing to solve their issue. So no,
Mm.
there is no one universal golden pill, but there could be a golden pill for an individual if you know enough about them.
Mm. I suppose when it comes to government and policymakers, it's about dealing with the root causes of the issues that we have for our population as a whole. But for the individual, I guess it's from what you're saying, it's looking at, okay, well, what are the issues that we're actually dealing with? You can see or not when it comes to the aesthetic or cosmetic use, but you can see the visible symptom of the health issues, whether it's mental, physical, both. But is it right to say that being able to identify what those issues are before deciding to introduce something that will have very extreme and effective results fast?
So that is the goal, right? Because what is the goal? The goal is for the everybody in almost like Star Trek, for me to be able to take a little wand and go, and then to say that, okay, look, mate, okay, I think what you need is this dose of this. You need a mental health thingy. You need to have an exercise routine here, and you need to blah. Okay, that is the goal. We need to understand far more before we can get to that stage. But as a goal, whether or not it's attainable, should we have something where we can look at a person? I mean, the goal obviously is to prevent illness to begin with. Prevention is always better than trying to cure something that's there. But that will, I think, be impossible to prevent everything. And so we need to prevent what we can prevent. But we then, once you actually have an issue, then we need the ability to sort of say, well, sort of work backwards to say, this is what caused it to begin with. We need to remove this, add a bit of this, halve this, and that's you fixed. So it's two separate problems. Prevention is better than cure, but I think full prevention is never possible because there's just too many moving parts.
Mm-hmm. And can we just talk about unseen consequences and results? What are the things that you may not know about Ozempic that you ought to know? And what are the positive aspects of it in the balance? What
Okay.
are the pros and cons, the way that you
Okay.
see it?
So everything has good things and bad things, side effects. So let's deal with the side effects first. I think that the common side effects, relatively common side effects, are known and they tend to affect the gastrointestinal tract. Okay, so the most common one is feeling nauseous. And the reason why you feel nauseous is because the natural role of gut hormones. So if you've had a bad prawn and food poisoning, and we've all had food poisoning, you run to the loo, what happens there, what drives the puking, is actually a big spike in gut hormones, in particular GLP-1. So GLP-1 goes poop, and you go, ah, everything comes out. That's the natural role of GLP-1. Okay. So if you happen to be a bit sensitive to it and you're taking it, that's one of the side effects. The second side effect, these gut hormones are designed to regulate the flow of food through your tube, okay? Fast or slow, okay? So the other side, if it's too fast, okay, or if it's too slow, that's the other side effect of Ozempic. Then, as more and more millions are now on the drug, rarer side effects have now emerged. Now, remember, side effects can be positive or negative. So the negative side effects have to do with, for example, people suddenly feeling very, very rarely, it really influences mental health, and particular in very extreme cases, some suicidal ideation. That's not good. Some of the positive rare side effects are that suddenly people are beginning to realize that if you're trying to quit smoking or trying to quit drinking or trying to quit drugs of abuse, if you're on the drug, it's easier to do so. Now, I think, and they're testing it, okay? I think that there is an overlap about why some people get more depressed when they're on the drug, and some people find it easier to quit something. The part of the brain that makes things feel nice, the reward element of the brain, it's the same part of the brain. The roots to it are different. So for eating, for drugs, for sex, for whatever it is, it hits the feel nice bit through different roots. But if you take off a little bit of the edge of a big part of joy to a lot of people, which is food, right? Because eating feels nice, then do you take off the joy for other things as well? So that actually, if you're slightly more depressive, you may say, I've lost some joy in life. Or on the other side, if you are trying to quit smoking or drinking or drugs or whatever it is you're trying to quit, that actually because you've now taken some of the joy from smoking a fag or from drinking too much, it's then easier to quit. So that's an example of the complexities, shall we say, of actually trying to do this. And one of the rarest, not rarest, one of the positive side effects that have been emerged is that it is there is good evidence that it slows down the progression of neurodegenerative disorders. Why? We don't know. We think that there is a broader anti-inflammatory effect on these drugs, okay, that therefore slow down Alzheimer's. It's being tried. Well, let's see what the deal is. But if that is so, then that is another reason to sort of tweak the dose and for people to actually do it. It's not going to cure Alzheimer's. I don't think that's a different thing. But slowing down the progression, that's really exciting.
Amazing. Thank you. I know that we haven't got that much time left, Giles. It's been such a pleasure talking to you. I just have one last thing that I'd like to cover before we wrap things up. So, when it comes to navigating the fine line between empowerment and exploitation, how would you describe informed decision making and then also the long term considerations?
I think it is always dangerous to leave the use of a powerful drug to informed decision making. Now, that doesn't mean it doesn't happen. I think the safest way, the best way to put up barriers and to put up guardrails is to make sure the drug is only given by a doctor or at least a healthcare professional who's
Mhm.
able to assess the things that they need to assess. The problem is if you can choose at the moment, it's too easy to get it. If you can choose to just and go and get it, those guardrails are not there. And I think it is some people are more careful than others. Some people do things for different reasons. So my answer is you cannot just leave it to someone to make that kind of decisions themselves. They need to have guidance from people who can take a step back and can look at the whole wraparound and decide, or at least help you decide, if taking this drug is the right thing to do.
Mhm. And perhaps as part of it that could come into play is also redefining success. What does success look like for us as a culture?
Exactly. And I think success should be health span. People think longevity. Well, I don't want to live. I don't want to live to I'm 90 if I'm spending the last 15 years in a bed. I
Mm,
just don't, right? So I think, to my mind, money, whatever it is, I think ultimately most of us want to be healthy for as long as possible. Happy, what does that mean? But healthy for as long as possible. And I think because if you're healthy for as long as possible, then most things in life should be sort of right, you would hope.
mm,
And so let's aim for that. I think that should be the metric for success.
hmm. And also, it's important to acknowledge that health is something that is so easy to take for granted until you don't have it.
until you don't have it. And it happens pretty freaking quickly. We've all had family members that suddenly had a stroke, cancer, heart, all kinds of things. And suddenly one day you are healthy, and it doesn't matter how big or old or what you are. When you lose that health, it is always devastating.
Mm. And I'd like to also say that you can't measure beauty by size.
You,
Just
we cannot.
no.
But how are we going to change society's mindset with that? I don't know.
Thank you so, so much for your time, Giles. It's been absolutely such a pleasure to talk to you today, and I can't wait to share this with everyone. Just one last question before you go. If you were to give one piece of advice to someone listening who might be struggling in any of the ways that we've talked about, what would that be?
I I don't want to sound like a fortune cookie, but I think that many people are probably experiencing the same thing you're experiencing, and the best way to do it is to speak to someone. Always, always. It's never going to be unique to you. So speak to someone and try and get help. I sound like a fortune cookie, but I think it is true.
No, you don't at all. Thank you so much, Giles. It's honestly such a pleasure. I really, really, really appreciate you taking the time. And I hope for anyone listening that this has informed your perspective, offered the relevant critiques, empowerment, and challenges to this hot topic. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. I hope you found it informative and interesting. To help support the podcast, please subscribe to the channel and follow us on social media for any updates. I'm so excited to see you very soon again.